The whisper beneath the pages. The desert winds blew softly through the ancient alleyways of Fez, where the sun bathed every wall in gold. But inside the cool, quiet room of the old madrasa, a different light flickered. A deeper one, not from the sun, but from the heart of a worn book that had been hidden for generations. Hamza, a student of Islamic history, sat cross-legged before a pile of dusty manuscripts, his fingers brushing against fragile pages that seemed to hum with age. His teacher, Sheikh Umar, had given him permission to explore the back shelves of the library, a place most students never dared to enter, not out of fear, but out of reverence, because what lay there were remnants of forbidden texts, misinterpreted scrolls, and handwritten notes on subjects scholars chose not to speak of. He turned a page and paused. It was not written in Arabic, but in Ge'ez, an ancient Ethiopian script. Hamza recognized it immediately. His heart skipped a beat. This was not from the Quran, nor from the Hadith, nor from any tafsir he had ever studied. The title was faded, but still visible. The Book of Enoch. He had heard of it only once, whispered between two guest scholars after a late lecture. Both had gone quiet the moment they noticed him listening. Enoch was known as Idris in Islam, the prophet who was lifted to the heavens without tasting death, mentioned briefly in the Quran, but always surrounded by silence. When scholars debated his story, why would this book be here in a madrasa library, preserved and yet hidden? Who had put it here, and why had no one ever spoken of it? Hamza gently opened the book. The script was challenging, but he was trained in languages and driven by an overwhelming pull. The first page spoke of watchers of divine beings who descended to earth and took interest in mankind. It spoke of heavenly secrets, taught to men knowledge that was not meant for them, and a punishment so vast it shook the cosmos. Leaned back, breathing slowly. He knew this was not accepted scripture, but it spoke of a prophet honored in Islam, and it carried tales that echoed faintly with verses he knew from the Quran, stories of angels, stories of the flood, stories of knowledge that tested the very fabric of faith. That evening, Sheikh Umar called him into his private study. The room was dim, only one oil lamp flickered against the wall. Hamza walked in carefully, holding the Book of Enoch close to his chest as if it would vanish if he let it go. "You found it?" the sheikh said without even turning around, his voice heavy and low. "Yes," Hamza answered. "I found it at the back under the manuscripts on pre-Islamic poetry. It was placed intentionally." Sheikh nodded slowly, then turned his eyes deep and unreadable. "You must understand, young one, this book is not haram, but it is dangerous, not because of lies, but because of truths hidden between metaphors and lost context, truths that can shake the weak and empower the arrogant, truths that even our greatest scholars refuse to debate openly. But Enoch is Idris in our tradition," Hamza said. "If this was his book, then why do we fear it? Because not all knowledge is meant for every heart." Sheikh Umar replied, "Not all minds can separate truth from shadow. Not all truths bring peace. Some ignite wars." Hamza looked down at the book. The words on the pages now seemed heavier. The mention of angels who taught humans forbidden arts, the idea of a punishment sealed deep within the earth, the great flood that was not just to cleanse mankind, but to reset a balance disrupted by celestial disobedience. Sheikh Umar reached for a worn leather pouch and took out an old scroll. He unfolded it slowly. It was in Arabic, but the handwriting was ancient and meticulous. "This is a letter written by Ibn Kathir himself," the sheikh said. "He references the Book of Enoch not by name, but by content. He warns future scholars to treat it with caution. He acknowledges its possibility, but advises the Ummah to focus on what is clear and preserved." Hamza read the scroll, his eyes widening. It was true. Then the scholars knew of this text. They didn't reject it blindly, but approached it with restraint. They feared the misguidance it could bring if handled carelessly. But Hamza also saw something else: the connection between what Enoch wrote and the deeper layers of the Quran. Not contradiction, but echoes, shadows of greater meanings locked behind allegories and ancient symbols. The Chundoba. Next day, he returned to the library, not to hide the book again, But to study it not with arrogance, but with humility, he began comparing verses, mapping themes, noting where the Quran spoke of events and where Enoch expanded on them with vivid detail. The story of the Watchers matched the brief mention of angels who disobeyed the divine command. The punishment in the book mirrored the flood of Noah. The naming of stars and the mapping of seasons resonated with the knowledge Idris was known to possess. One sentence stayed with Hamza more than any other: a line buried in the middle chapters of Enoch's writing. The ones who fall from heaven seek to teach men what they never earned, and in doing so, open the gates to things they cannot close. He sat back from his scrolls, his eyes burning not from tiredness, but from the weight of comprehension. Perhaps the book was not hidden because it was false. Perhaps it was hidden because it was too true, and humans were not ready to hold such truth without warping it. As days passed, Hamza stopped sharing his findings. Even with Sheikh Umar, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Something was changing in him. He began dreaming of places he had never seen. Mountains floating in starlight, voices speaking in forgotten tongues, and always a figure standing at the edge of the dream, watching not with eyes, but with presence. On the seventh night of study, the madrasa cat who never entered the library stepped inside and sat beside him, its green eyes fixed on the book as if it too understood the moment. Hamza turned the page to a chapter called The Fire Beneath. He heard a faint sound from behind the walls, a sound like wind passing through stone, but the windows were shut and the night was still. He paused, his hands trembling. Something was watching him, not with malice, but with interest, ancient interest, like a gatekeeper who had waited too long for someone to returning. The following days, people in the madrasa began whispering about strange lights in the courtyard at night. The imam's daughter spoke of a dream where Idris walked into her room and told her to tell the truth to those who forgot the sky. Hamza said nothing, but inside he knew the book was not just a record, it was a call. He was not reading the book was reading him. And through him, it was waking up something the world had buried long ago, under doctrines and fears and the illusion of completeness. And then one day a man arrived at the madrasa, tall, silent, wearing no shoes, and asking no permission. He walked straight to Hamza as if he had followed the thread of fate itself. He did not speak until he stood inches away from the young student. Then in perfect Arabic he said, "You have read what should not be spoken, but now you must walk where no path is drawn." Hamza stared into his eyes and saw stars swirling in silence, and in that moment, the Book of Enoch closed itself without touch, as if obeying a command far older than man. The man with no shadow. Hamza stood frozen, his mind trying to understand who the man before him truly was. The madrasa walls felt distant, like he had been pulled into a different space, though his feet were still on the same marble floor. The man with no shoes, no name, and no shadow simply stared at him, his presence calm but unnatural. Like the air shifted wherever he went. The man finally blinked and then said, "You are not the first to open that book, but you may be the last to survive it." Hamza tried to speak, but his voice stuck in his throat. The man moved past him without touching anything, his steps making no sound. He walked toward the shelf where the book had once been hidden, and stood there for a long time, as if listening to something beyond the stone and paper. "Do you know why the book was removed from the people?" the man asked finally, his voice not loud, yet it filled the entire library. "It was not because of its lies, but because of its timing. Some truths must remain buried until the hearts of men are ready to carry them without becoming gods." Hamza managed to whisper, "Who are you?" "I am one who failed to forget," the man said, "and what I could not forget, I was made to remember for others." Then he turned back and looked directly into Hamza's eyes. "You have seen the names of the Watchers, you have read the warning within the fire beneath, and you have begun to dream, which means the gates are no longer sealed." Hamza's heart beat fast as the man walked closer again. The air around him was dense, as if time bent where he stepped. He reached into a satchel that looked older than anything Hamza had seen and pulled out a scroll tied with a black cord. This was written by the ones who heard Idris speak on the mountaintop long before Babel, long before tongues were divided and nations were named. It was not prophecy, it was remembrance. The man said, give it to your teacher and tell him the book has awakened again. The skies have begun to stir, and what was sealed in darkness now seeks to rise in light. Hamza took the scroll with both hands. It was warm, as if just touched by fire. The man nodded once, then walked away through the hall, his figure fading into shadows. Not like someone disappearing around a corner, but like someone being erased from the fabric of sight. For a long time Hamza sat there, holding the scroll, then rose and went to Sheikh Umar's chambers. When he entered, the teacher was already awake, sitting with a cup of tea untouched on the table, as if expecting him. Met him, the sheikh said. Hamza nodded, slowly handed over the scroll and sat on the floor. Sheikh Umar opened it, his eyes scanning the ancient symbols, then stopped, his face tightening. This should not exist, he said. I saw this scroll when I was your age. I held it for 5 breaths, then it vanished. It came back, Hamza said, or maybe it waited. Sheikh closed the scroll and said, then the chain has returned and the dream has found its next bearer. He took out a deep blue notebook and placed it between them. This was given to me by my own teacher, and his by his before him. It is not a book of tafsir, but a collection of observations from those who witnessed the side of Islam. No one teaches at the minbar. Those who saw the skies split without a storm and the winds whisper names not found in the Qur'an. Turned to a page marked in red ink and read aloud, when the children of heaven fall, they bring gifts to man, but those gifts become poison if opened with pride. The watchers knew this, but they did not turn back. Instead, they loved the daughters of the earth and taught them to make weapons of stone and hearts of iron. Hamza shivered. He had read the same passage in the Book of Enoch, though phrased differently. The meaning was the same. Knowledge from the heavens had once walked among men, but the cost was too high. The balance was broken, and the flood was sent not just to cleanse sin, but to erase forbidden knowledge. Sheikh Umar looked at him, his voice steady. You are not the first, Hamza, but you may be the first to choose differently. Most who read that book become obsessed. They forget the Quran, they forget balance, they chase secret power, they seek the watchers as if they are saints. But they are not, they are the ones who disobeyed the divine. Hamza nodded, but said quietly, yet Idris was lifted. He was not punished. The book may be dangerous, but it is not evil. It is not evil, the sheikh agreed, but like fire it gives light, or it burns depending on who holds it. Hamza felt a strange peace in those words. He began to understand the real reason the book had been hidden. It was not to erase the truth, but to protect people from seeking it before they were prepared. That night, Hamza sat again with the Book of Enoch, this time with a different heart. He no longer read it like a secret, but like a mirror. Every page reflected not only ancient times, but the soul of the one reading it. He saw how pride led the watchers to descend, how love twisted into control, how knowledge given freely without patience caused chaos. He also saw a pattern. The stories in the book lined up strangely with events of modern times. Rising storms, unexplained earthquakes, lost tribes reappearing, and a growing obsession with ancient technologies. Even among secular scholars, he made notes and showed them to Sheikh Umar. The next day, the sheikh read carefully, then said, you see what few dare to see. The book is not a history, it is a cycle. The events are not just past, they are warning. They are prophecy, not in time, but in repetition. Hamza felt something stir in his chest, something ancient and vast, like a river waking beneath the earth. Then the dreams returned deeper. Now he saw Idris standing on a hill of broken stars, holding a scroll of light and fire. Around him were angels bound in chains, some weeping, others silent. Above them was a sky torn open, revealing a second sun, not bright, but dark, burning, not with light but memory. In the dream, Idris spoke to him not with sound, but with understanding. He said, tell them truth is not forbidden, but it is sacred, and those who run towards sacred things without washing their hearts will bleed where they should. Shine Hamza woke gasping. He knew now his path was not to expose the book or to reject it, but to guide those who would one day find it, as he did, not with fear, not with pride, but with deep humility. But something changed the moment he accepted this. The stars in the sky above the madrasa seemed to flicker in a pattern, as if aligning, and a name began to echo in his dreams, one he had never read but felt written inside him. Since birth Azazel, a name forgotten by most, a name punished by the heavens, a name that once shook the mountain where Idris stood and where the watchers fell. Hamza opened the book again, this time not alone, for behind him in the shadow stood a figure, tall, quiet, and watching. Watchers had returned, not in flesh but in presence, and they were waiting the return of the watchers. Hamza could feel it now, not just in the pages of the book, but in the very air around him, the feeling that eyes unseen were observing every move he made. The madrasa that once felt sacred and still now pulsed with something deeper, something older than even the stones it was built from. Each night, his dreams grew more vivid and more terrifying, yet also filled with a strange peace, as if something ancient was drawing him closer, not to harm, but to awaken. Azazel, the name echoed again and again, not just in sleep but in silence, during prayer, and even in the rustle of leaves outside his window. It came not with darkness but with weight, the kind of name that held centuries within a single breath. He had read about Azazel in the Book of Enoch, one of the leaders of the fallen watchers who taught mankind forbidden knowledge, weapon sorcery, and the crafting of vanity. He was said to be chained beneath the desert, awaiting the day of reckoning. But Hamza felt in his bones that something had changed. He walked through the madrasa gardens toward Sheikh Umar's quarters and found the old man sitting beside the fountain watching the stars. The sheikh did not look surprised to see him. In fact, he had 2 cups of tea already waiting. "You feel it too?" Hamza said as he sat down. The sheikh nodded slowly. "They are watching not as spirits, but as witnesses. The barrier between times has weakened, and you are the thread holding it together." Hamza stared at the reflection of the sky in the fountain. Stars seemed brighter tonight, or perhaps they were closer. Sheikh Umar sipped his tea, then spoke. "What have you learned since the last dream?" Hamza breathed deeply. "Idris warned me again. He said the watchers never truly left. They were sealed, not because of punishment, but because of what they carried. They hold knowledge that burns like fire in the wrong hands. Azazel taught men the art of war, not with malice, but with misplaced love. He wanted them to defend themselves, but men twisted his gift into conquest." Sheikh Umar closed his eyes and nodded. "That is the hidden truth most cannot accept. Not all who fell were evil. Some simply crossed a line out of compassion and paid the price. But now they stir." Hamza said, "The scroll is reacting to the stars. I traced them last night and found they match the same alignment described in Enoch, chapter 72, the same alignment said to mark the release of the first chain." Sheikh looked at him carefully, then said, "You must not chase this alone. There is someone you must meet, someone who once walked the same path and survived." Hamza felt a shiver run through him. "Who she lives in the highlands near the cave of Aswat." The sheikh said, "She was once a scholar, a woman of deep knowledge, until the book found her, but instead of losing herself, she became its guardian. She may tell you more if she believes you are not seeking power." Hamza packed that very night. The journey would take days, but he felt drawn to the destination like gravity. He carried the Book of Enoch wrapped in cloth, the scroll from the barefoot man, and a small journal to record everything. Road to the highlands was quiet, barren hills rising around him like ancient watchers of their own. The deeper he went, the fewer birds sang, and the sky grew more silver than blue. On the 3rd day, he reached the edge of the cave. A small hut, built from stones and wood, sat outside, and an old woman stood waiting for him, as if she had known he would come. "You carry the book," she said, "not as a weapon, but as a wound." Hamza bowed with respect. I seek no power, only understanding. She studied him, her eyes sharp but not cruel, then nodded. Once come inside, the winds will not wait forever. Hut was simple, filled with dried herbs, old scrolls, and carvings on the walls. Some looked older than any script Hamza had ever seen. She handed him a bowl of warm drink and sat across from him. Do you know what the Watchers truly were? She asked. Not just fallen angels, but beings of light who chose shadow out of misguided love. They pitied man and sought to guide him, not knowing that guidance without divine permission is disobedience. No matter the intention. Hamza nodded. That is what I feel from the book. It is not evil. It is a warning wrapped in memory. She smiled softly. You see clearer than most. But the danger now is not just in reading the book. It is in the awakening. The Watchers are not returning to rule, but to complete what they began. Their time is ending, and they seek someone to carry their memories before they vanish completely. He looked at her, puzzled. What does that mean? She pointed to the scroll, the one given to you by the man with no shadow. It contains names that were once sealed. Those names hold resonance if spoken. They unlock memories not just in the world, but in the soul. They carry echoes of the first war between will and obedience. Hamza opened the scroll slowly. The names written there shimmered faintly, even in the dim light, not in ink, but as if burned into the paper by some unseen fire. As he read the first name aloud, the walls trembled a little, not violently, but like something had turned to listen. The woman closed her eyes and whispered, one of them is near. The wind outside picked up, and the sky darkened, even though it was still early afternoon. Hamza stood, his heart pounding. He felt something push against the air, a pressure, a presence. Then a voice spoke, not in sound, but in the back of his mind. You have called, and I have heard. Hamza turned but saw nothing, yet he felt it just beyond sight. A being waiting, watching, not to harm, but to see if he was worthy. You seek truth, the voice said, then carry this burden and see what truth demands. Suddenly Hamza saw visions, flashes of stars falling, a golden city sinking into sand. Idris standing on a tower with chains of light in his hands, and Azazel beneath the earth, staring upward with eyes that burned like suns. Then all fell silent, and the room returned to stillness. The woman opened her eyes and said, you are marked. Now they will come to you, not as enemies, but as reminders. Each Watcher bound beneath the earth remembers the face of man they taught, and now they seek to speak once more. Hamza sat down, shaken, not with fear but with awe. The Watchers were not myths. They were part of a forgotten chapter, a warning carved into time, and now they were stirring once again. She handed him an old talisman, worn from age. Speak no name aloud, unless the sky answers first, she said. And remember, not all truths are given to be told. Some are given to be carried. Hamza nodded. The path was no longer one of books and dreams, but of walking between worlds, between what is remembered and what is erased. And as he left the cave, he felt a whisper in the wind, a voice he could not place yet, somehow had always known. We remember youth. Gate beneath the sand. Hamza walked back from the highlands with a silence that ran deeper than words, not the silence of fear, but of knowing too much. His hand still held the talisman, given by the old woman, its shape simple, yet its presence heavy, like it held more than stone. Perhaps it carried memory, perhaps it carried time. As he stepped once again into the gates of the madrasa, something had changed. Students paused and stared as he passed, their eyes confused, like they saw someone familiar yet different. Even the cats that wandered the courtyard no longer approached him but watched from corners, as if they remembered something they had no words for. Sheikh Umar met him near the fountain, and without speaking led him into the prayer room. They sat facing the Qibla and waited for the call to prayer. As the adhan echoed through the walls, Hamza felt its words vibrate deeper than before, each phrase wrapped in meaning, layered with echoes of the unseen. After prayer, the sheikh spoke, you carry more than knowledge. Now you carry a thread that connects two worlds. Hamza nodded. The Watchers are not returning to conquer. They are returning to remind. The earth remembers them, not in books, but in storms and cracks in the ground, and in the bloodlines of those who still hear the call. Sheikh Umar looked at him with sorrow, then asked, "Do you understand what Idris meant when he said truth is sacred, not forbidden?" Hamza whispered, "Yes. The sacred is not hidden because it is weak, but because it is too strong. It must be handled by hearts that know surrender, not pride." Sheikh opened a small box from beneath the carpet, and inside was a second scroll, older than any. Hamza had seen the writing was in no known language, yet as he looked the symbols reshaped themselves into meanings, not words, but understandings, like dream logic that made sense only when you felt it. This was passed down from teacher to teacher. The sheikh said it was said to be written by Idris, not with ink but with light, on nights when the stars opened paths no man could see. Hamza touched the scroll and saw images, not visions this time, but memories of a time when the Watchers lived among men, not as gods, not as devils, but as guides before their error, before their fall. One memory stood out, a moment when Idris stood before them, holding the first scroll, and saying, "You gave what was not yours to give, and now the burden will fall upon those who remember." The Watchers bowed, not in fear, but in grief, and vanished one by one beneath the earth, beneath oceans, beneath mountains, each sealed with a name that could only be spoken when the stars realigned. Hamza opened his journal and began to write. Not what he saw, but what he understood. The Watchers were not just beings from another realm. They were reflections of human desire to reach beyond limits, to grasp the divine without discipline, to seek shortcuts to power. Azazel had not hated mankind, he had pitied them, and in that pity he gave them fire, but fire given without permission can still burn a village. That night, as Hamza walked toward the library, the air grew thick, and the lanterns flickered. Though there was no wind, he entered, and the Book of Enoch lay on the floor, already open to a chapter he had not read before. The gate beneath the page described a hidden gate buried beneath the desert, near the ruins of an ancient city, one lost before the time of pharaohs. A city built by the Watchers as a last attempt to preserve what they had taught before judgment fell upon them. Chapter ended with a symbol, the same as the talisman. He now wore it. Was not a location, it was an invitation. He looked up and saw someone standing at the doorway. The man with no shadow returned his eyes, deep, his voice softer than before. "The time has come," he said. "The gate beneath the sand is stirring, and your presence is the key, not to open, but to bear witness." Hamza followed him out of the madrasa, through narrow streets into the desert, the sky above clear, yet the stars burned brighter than ever before, as if they were watching, as if they remembered too. They walked for hours, the city lights fading behind them, until only dunes and darkness surrounded them. Then suddenly the ground shifted, and a thin blue line appeared across the sand, glowing like moonlight trapped under glass. The man knelt and placed his hand on the ground, whispering a phrase Hamza had never heard, yet somehow understood. "We return not to change the world, but to remember it." The sand split, revealing a stairway descending into stone lit by a soft light that did not flicker. Hamza stepped down, each footfall echoing as if touching not just stone but memory itself. The walls were carved with scenes, not of war, not of worship, but of teaching stars, maps, healing symbols, and the birth of languages. At the bottom they entered a chamber where 7 pillars stood, each marked with a name. Hamza recognized from the scroll the Watchers, the ones who taught the arts, who shaped the winds, who mapped the skies, each sealed here, not as prisoners, but as reminders. A pool of water lay in the center, and in its reflection Hamza saw not himself, but Idris standing tall with the same talisman around his neck. Idris spoke, and Hamza heard it in his soul. "If you read this, then the time has begun. The world forgets, but you must remember. Remind them, not with power, not with fear, but with humility. Speak not of us as gods nor as devils, but as warnings and as hope." Hamza turned to the man with no shadow and asked, "Why me?" "Because you never desired the throne, only the truth," he answered. The pillars began to hum softly, and the symbols on them glowed, then faded, and in that moment, Hamza knew the Watchers had been released not into the world, but into memory. Their stories no longer sealed their truths now. Part of those who would listen with clean hearts, he returned to the madrasa days later. Though no time seemed to pass for others, the Book of Enoch now closed itself when not in use, and glowed faintly at dawn, as if it waited for the next seeker. Hamza became a teacher, but he never claimed title, never wrote books, never preached. He simply told stories to those who asked and gave answers only to those who listened with more than ears. The truth was never banned, it was only delayed until someone could carry it without breaking, and now that someone was him. Watchers returned not as rulers but as reminders, and the stars watched in silence as the gate beneath the sand closed once more, not forever, but until it was needed again. The end.